All right, we are looking at some of the finds inside. You'll notice the statues are headless. Part of that is the fact that the Muslims didn't want any reproduction of a head and probably knocked them off, but also there was a thought to be an attempt to kind of change the head for a later person so that you wouldn't have to dig out the whole, to carve out the whole body again. The most famous one is this one, a shepherd with a sheep around his back. It reminds us of Jesus who went after the one of the 100 sheep. And all of these were simply what was left and beheaded, and maybe for that reason, or the fact that they considered this idolatry, and so they didn't want them to have heads and broke them that way. They were surprised to find that they found a podiatrist's office here, and that was the sign that it existed over there. Well, it's difficult to talk about everything that happened here, but let's go back to the trips of Paul. He left here and went to the north at Tarshish for a time, but then the second missionary journey, he left from here. He came back on the third missionary journey, and finally, at the end of the third missionary journey, there was a prophet from Judah named Agabus, who without word came up to Paul, took off his belt, and then enshackled himself with it and prophesied, if this prophet goes back to if this man goes back to Jerusalem, he will be put to death. And from that time on, the people were admonishing Paul, don't go back to Jerusalem, don't go. But he felt he had to go. And of course, he was arrested there. At Aphek, we didn't get to visit, was where he stopped. It was called Antipatris in the New Testament. Overnight, we dug there and we found the Roman section, but not, of course, where he would have been kept overnight. They did that because they were wanting to kill him in Jerusalem. And so for here, he was imprisoned for 2 years. He was spoken by Festus and then Felix and then King Agrippa II. And one passage in the 12th chapter of Acts took place here. Now, if you can imagine, this was acoustically perfect. The Romans would build it so, and you can stand down there and you can hear from the top step. I remember being in one of the 7 New Testament church sites where it had a deep theater, and we were up at the top, and the guide had cigarette wrapping paper of a cigarette passage, and he was crinkling it in his thumbs. We heard him all the way to the top, a 20,000-seat amphitheater, or 2,000-seat amphitheater, but up the hill. And so what you see here is what he built, the whole city, what's left of it. His palace is out beyond that building. That was a wall to keep it separated in a matter of 12 years, starting in 22 BC, finished it in 10 BC. They were made, the Mediterranean tide was made to clean out the sewers. That's the way it was built. But that took place. Cornelius, you remember, was a believer, and he's the one that was sent told about Peter, that he was there, that he could go to Peter, and he went. And of course, Peter was in the housetop of the Simon the tanner, taking a nap, and the Lord let down a sheet out of heaven, and all of the clean and unclean animals were there, pigs and rabbits, which were prohibited in the Old Testament times, and so they were there, and the Spirit told him, rise up and eat. Oh, I can't. And so that happened 3 times, and finally, whatever the Lord considers pure, you must consider too. Then he meets Cornelius, who had come that far, and it's a day's journey going each way. And he found the Lord, and Peter, of course, would have changed at that point, recognizing some of the taboos of the Old Testament no longer existed. Those were made for health reasons, really. And so now you have Philip coming here from after the Ethiopian eunuch, and he probably started a church here. And it appears that Paul stayed with him when he was here before he was imprisoned. Then this became the center of great learning. It was first by my, let me think of his name, Origen, who initiated a great learning. It was in the 300s when Origen came, and he was the one who wrote the Onomasticon that I mentioned, was a geography of the Holy Land. But by the time he had finished, there was a library here that was outstanding with many volumes of books. In addition, I'll read for you this passage, Death of Herod. Herod, oh, my mind is failing me. Now, Herod and Agrippa, okay, so now he was very angry, this is Herod Agrippa, that the people of Tyre, with the people of Tyre and Sidon, were one accord, and they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace, because their country was fed by the king's country. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering the address to the people. The people kept crying out, "The voice of God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and be multiplied, and Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem, where they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was called Mark. So it was on this platform that occurred. The platform had place for them to go under and beneath. If one exited this side, could come in the other side. So there was a hall under here. Then there was a tea area going back this way where they had dressing rooms. They always had to have a theater. And so this was where that occurred, of course. And it was built by Herod because he wanted to be able to have those programs that could only be done in the theater. The original ivory is the floor here. There were statues in each of those niches, and most of this had to be put down new, but you see some of the original ones right over here. The top stones of the upper level had to be the original, but this would be where the important person would be, the king or whatever, staying in that niche. But some of those seats just to the left of the tubing is the original seat, but all of the rest had to be replaced. And so it was set so that acoustically you could hear easily, the wind always coming from the west. And so most of this was remade, but if you'll notice, this original side is also here. Those stones out there are original. And then Herod's palace was back behind that wall, so we will go that way next. Follow me. You can see some of the columns. Oh, I better slow down. Some of the columns from the construction, they had very, very hard stone as well as limestone, granite, and uncovered, and all they could do was just line them up. And all of those are coming from capitals and from various buildings, massive stones that were recovered in the digging, and so they wanted to just distribute it this way.
These columns, all this seating, you know how many seats?
4,000.
4,000. Do they?
Wow.
Do they ever fill it today? I mean, is it used?
Oh, I've seen it filled because they have programs all the time.
I think so, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they have big concerts and they have music, all kinds of things. And you're lucky to get a seat on those cases. You have to have tickets. These are remains of buildings and streets. These columns are granite, kind of a pink stone. Usually has to come from way down in south in Egypt. I'm not sure whether they're granite in Rome or not. There may be, but in any case, ivory would have come from Rome. But capitals, and this is called it's something like a mausoleum, something like an ossuary, but it is the whole body of a person to be wealthy, and they were buried in that kind of thing. It's an old one here and a newer one there. Okay, follow me.
So this is from flowing water,
Are we in a movie? Yep.
Right, left from here.
All right, this is Herod's palace. Paul would have been here somewhere, interviewed by Festus and Felix and King Agrippa. And the evidence of Pontius Pilate, the only evidence that was found outside of the Bible, was found when they were excavating in 1956 the floor, turned it over, and there was the stone that is replicated here of Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Jerusalem. So this is a replica. We'll see the original in the museum. You'll be able to see it. And so it was all and just this long, I think about 3 circumferences, and then you had the chariot race decided. They have in iron at the other end chariots in ready to race, so it was a race horse stadium, not for just horse races but chariot races, whereas the hippodrome, as it's called, the big one, was the one where 30,000 could sit. And they had columns at both ends that were polished as best they could be polished, and they were called taraxippos, which were horse frighteners. And these race horses, the horses that were pulling the chariots, would see their reflection as they came, and it caused them to turn faster in the chariot races. So this was a small one, and the other one hasn't been excavated that was so large. I doubt that they will excavate it. There were Arabs here that fled in 1948, and there's the minaret that was from that time. But all of this at the right is Byzantine, when the city reached its pinnacle of greatness, and then it began to decline. And there were a lot of mosaics painted in the floor over there. And so basically you're looking at what was built by Herod and then enlarged later by Byzantine Christians.